Disclaimer: this video is of humorous nature only. The author does not seek to insult or humiliate anyone. The video may contain profanity. People under the age of 16 should refrain from watching this video. Story 1. Miriam Rodriguez Martinez. Her daughter was kidnapped and murdered by the Mexican cartel. The police didn't lift a finger to help, so she tracked down and arrested 10 cartel members herself. She knew it would result in her death. She did it anyway. "I don't care if they kill me," Rodriguez told a friend, according to the New York Times. "I died the day they killed my daughter. I want to end this. I'm going to take out the people who hurt my daughter, and they can do whatever they want to me." Sadly, her words proved prophetic as she was murdered by the cartel on the 10th of May 2017, which is Mother's Day in Mexico. Story 5. Look up Joe Medicine Crow. He was the last war chief of the Crow tribe and the last Plains Indian war chief. During Joe Medicine Crow completed all 4 tasks required to become a war chief: touching an enemy without killing him, counting coup, taking an enemy's weapon, leading a successful war party, and stealing an enemy's horse. Story 6. Franz Stigler, who upon coming upon a defenseless and battered B-17, not only couldn't bring himself to shoot them down, but escorted the American crew all the way to the English Channel. Along the way, he warded off other German fighters and flew close enough to the aircraft that German AA wouldn't open fire on it. The crew survived the encounter, and Stigler turned around and returned to his base once they left German airspace. Story 8. My great-granddad. French POW during W2 who, along with a friend, killed a couple Nazi guards, swiped their uniforms, and then somehow made it over to the U.S., where he met my great-grandmother. Side note, the Nazis would force him to make ammo as a POW, but right before the boxes were shut to be sent off, he and his other POWs would piss on the contents to make them corrode and be useless by the time they were actually opened. Story 9. Forstauer. Cassius Marcellus Clay. For those of you who believe in the laws of God, I present to you this argument against slavery. Pulls out a Bible. For those of you who believe in the laws man, I present to you this argument against slavery. Pulls out a copy of the U.S. Constitution. For those of you who believe in neither the laws of God or man, I present to you this argument against slavery. Pulls out 2 pistols and places them on the table. Story 10. Story 11. Isabella of France held off an army with herself, her maids, and anyone else who remained in the castle. She was holed up in after her husband, the King of England, ran off with his lover, returned home to France, and then came back with an army to install her son on the throne instead. St. Olga of Kiev was not necessarily the most badass, but clever enough that when she turned down a proposal from the Byzantine emperor himself, he gave her the dowry he would have offered anyway. No strings attached. Will info dump about her upon request. Story 12. In 75 BCE, a band of Cilician pirates in the Aegean Sea captured a 25-year-old Roman nobleman named Julius Caesar, who had been on his way to study oratory in Rhodes. As the story is related in Plutarch's Parallel Lives, the capture was a minor inconvenience for Caesar, but very bad luck for the pirates. From the start, Caesar simply refused to behave like a captive. When the pirates told him that they had set his ransom at the sum of 20 talents, he laughed at them for not knowing who it was they had captured and suggested that 50 talents would be a more appropriate amount. He then sent his entourage out to gather the money and settled in for a period of captivity. The pirates must have been dumbfounded. It's not every day that a hostage negotiates his ransom up. Caesar made himself at home among the pirates, bossing them around and shushing them when he wanted to sleep. He made them listen to the speeches and poems that he was composing in his unanticipated downtime and berated them as illiterates if they weren't sufficiently impressed. He would participate in the pirates' games and exercises, but he always addressed them as if he were the commander, and they were his subordinates. From time to time, he would threaten to have them all crucified. They took it as a joke from their overconfident, slightly nutty captive. It wasn't a joke. After 38 days, the ransom was delivered, and Caesar went free. Astonishingly, Caesar managed to raise a naval force in Miletus, despite holding no public or military office, and he set out in pursuit of the pirates. He found them still camped at the island where he had been held, and he brought them back as his captives. When the governor of Asia seemed to vacillate about punishing them, Caesar went to the prison where they were being held and had them all crucified. Story 13. First John Robert Fox, U.S. Army He and his forward observer party were holed up in a small town in Italy where Germans began to overrun to town. He knew that reinforcements wouldn't arrive in time, so he radioed for an artillery strike on his position. His battalion commander objected, but Fox pressed on. Eventually, the strike killed over 100 German soldiers, but belayed them long enough for Allied forces to arrive. Fox and his party were killed in the strike, but many lives were saved. This happened in 1944. The sad part is that he was denied the Medal of Honor until 1997 because Eltider Fox happened to be black. Story 14. Malunka Savic, or Savage lol, did Mulan before it was cool in WB1 and went to war instead of her baby brother. Was a deadly accurate shooter, but also liked strapping bombs to herself and jumping into and decimating enemy trenches. Most decorated female soldier in the military history of the world. She only got found out because she took a grenade to the chest and promptly refused to spend the rest of the war as a nurse, deciding to go back to trenches instead. She got wounded 8 more times before the war was over. Story 15. Boudica, her husband, was one of the most powerful chieftains in Britain and an ally of the Rome. He died without a male heir, so made his daughters his heir. Local Roman authorities ignored it, burned his village, and proceeded to rape and flog Boudica and her 2 daughters, figuring what was a woman going to do? Well, she rallied her tribe and most of the locals, raised an army of tens of thousands, and proceeded to burn London and most of the Roman centers of power on the island to the ground. Story 16. My favorite story is the IRL Montoya. In 1944, Ilyahu Itzkovitz, a Jewish kid from Romania, watched his entire family get massacred by a concentration camp guard during WE. He remembered the guard's face so he could seek revenge. After the war, he found the camp guard's son and stabbed him with a butcher's knife. He was caught and sent to a juvenile detention center for 5 years until communist Romania allowed him to emigrate to Israel. After being drafted into the IDF, he somehow managed to find out he was serving in the French Foreign Legion in Indochina. He deserts the IDF, joins the Legion, manages to get deployed to Indochina, and goes so far as to be in the same squad as the camp guard. He was the squad leader. The guard did not recognize him. He volunteers to go on patrol with his family's killer. When he manages to separate the two from the rest of the patrol, he announced who he was and kills the guard. After his enlistment in the FFL is 5 years, he got sent to prison. Not for the murder, but because he deserted the IDF. He served 1 year in prison. Worth it. Story 17. The main American fleet was lured away by a decoy, and a small American task force was left in case any Japanese subs or other small Japanese attacks were made on American troop landings and their support. Instead, they were jumped by Japanese that included the largest battleship ever built, its twin, 2 additional battleships, and a bunch of other ships that were each larger than the American ships, and that way outnumbered the American shops. Charged the Japanese fleet, which inspired additional American attacks, and the Americans drove them off. The Johnston and other American ships sank, of course, but they saved thousands of soldiers' lives and end Japanese major fleet actions for the rest of the war. United States Navy Task Group Taffy-3 was not designed to engage enemy warships in combat. Comprised of just 6 carrier escorts, basically just ordinary merchant ships, each equipped with a flight deck and a complement of 30 aircraft, 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts, Taffy-3's primary mission during the American operation to retake the Philippines was to hang around off the coast of Leyte Island and launch ground attack aircraft to support the infantry assault. If a submarine or 2 came knocking on the door looking for a nice meaty carrier to Deep Six, or some stray squadron of Japanese fighter bombers stuck its nose where it didn't belong, the destroyers were equipped to handle it. So naturally, when Rear Admiral Clifton Ziggy Sprague, Taffy 3's commander, received a frantic radio call from one of his reconnaissance pilots reporting that the largest and most heavily armed assortment of surface-sailing battlecruisers ever assembled was bearing down on a collision course with Taffy 3, he was a little concerned. Story 18. Roy Benavidez. On May 2, 1968, a 12-man Special Forces patrol, which included 9 Montagnard tribesmen, was surrounded by an NVA infantry battalion of about 1,000 men. Roy Benavidez heard the radio appeal for help and boarded a helicopter to respond. He was a former member of the United States Army Special Forces who was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions in Vietnam. He is best known for surviving the impossible as he went to save his outnumbered comrades. The helicopter couldn't land because of the intense small arms fire, so he jumped from the hovering helicopter around 30 to 50 feet in the air armed with only a knife. He then had to run 75 meters to his comrades, where he was shot in the leg and face on the way. Once he got there, he started rescuing his squad mates, and while he was doing so, got shot in the gut and took a grenade to the back. After all of this, he was miraculously still mobile and still going. Roy then found out the helicopter he previously jumped from had crashed, so he went and rescued the wounded pilot from the wreckage and proceeded to call in airstrikes and call for another rescue attempt. He was then shot in the thigh a couple more times, and on his trip to the backup rescue chopper, he engaged in a battle an NVA soldier who stabbed him with his bayonet. Benavidez pulled it out, drew his own knife, killed him, and kept going, leaving his knife in the NVA soldier's body. He later killed 2 more NVA soldiers with an AK-47 while providing cover fire for the people boarding the helicopter. Once he finally made it back to the chopper, he then allowed his comrades to pull him in. When they arrived back to the base, a doctor came and examined him, but believed Benavidez was dead. The doctor was about to zip up the body bag when Benavidez managed to spit in his face to show that he was alive. Benavidez had a total of 37 separate bullet, bayonet, and shrapnel wounds from the 6-hour fight with the enemy battalion. Story 19. Maybe not the best link, but the info is in there. He's the original Steve Rogers minus the super serum. Audie did some incredible things in the Wii before becoming a very successful leading man in Hollywood. Edited. Because dumb. Story 20. After multiple failed assassination attempts by the Soviets, Joseph Broz Tito sent a letter to Stalin saying, "Stop sending people to kill me. We've already captured 5 of them, 1 of them with a bomb and another with a rifle. If you don't stop sending killers, I'll send one to Moscow, and I won't have to send a second one." There was no further attempts. Story 21. He is a real-life example of failing upwards. A complete idiot that through sheer luck became one of America's first millionaires. The best part is his rivals kept trying to trick him into bad business decisions, but for various reasons, all his business moves succeeded splendidly. Here are some examples. 1. His rivals tricked him into shipping bed warmers to the West Indies, a tropical island that never gets cold. But it turns out the bed warmers were just about perfect for ladling molasses, and rum plantations bought them out in days. 2. After the success with the bed warmers, Timothy decided that if they needed bed warmers so badly in the West Indies, then they must also need wool mittens. It just so happened that a passing vessel at the West Indies port was heading to Siberia and bought out the mittens to trade there. Another huge success. 3. As a joke, folks told him to ship coal to Newcastle, a region known for its coal mines. His coal shipment arrived shortly after a miners' strike ran the price of coal up through the roof. 4. He sent a shipment of cats to the Caribbean and again sold out immediately due to a massive island-wide rat infestation. 5. He bought a huge order of whalebones on accident, which made him effectively the only supplier of whalebone for the corset industry in New England. 6. Wrote a pickle for the knowing ones after the first edition was widely mocked for its lack of punctuation marks. In the second edition, Dexter added a few pages in the back that were nothing but punctuation marks so that readers could peeper and salt it as they please. 7. His mausoleum has an inscription that reads, "I am the first in the East, the first in the West, and the greatest philosopher in the Western world." Story 22. Stanislav Petrov, the man who saved the world from nuclear annihilation. During the Cold War in 1983, he was the commanding officer at an early warning satellite command center in Russia, whose system detected one and then another 5 nuclear missiles fired from the U.S. towards Russia. Protocol was for him to immediately warn his superiors, who would launch a rapid full counter-assault against the U.S. within minutes of the threat detection. However, Petrov hesitated. He was confused as to why the U.S., if they indeed intended to attack Russia with missiles, would only fire 6 instead of a full-scale missile attack. He chose not to follow protocol and report the attack, which prevented Russia from firing their counterlaunch. He declared that the system must have been reporting a false alarm given how few missiles the U.S. were firing. It turned out he was right. The early warning detection satellite system falsely detected the sun reflecting off of clouds as U.S. missile launches. This incident remained classified for 15 years before being made public in 1998. He is credited as being the man who saved the world. Story 23. Faking your own death to enter a fortified city in a coffin. Jumping out, killing the bishop presiding over your burial, opening the gates and pillaging the place with your Viking buddies. There are heaps of possible examples. Horribly mutilated soldiers who, after their heroics, drag their almost corpses back to base across huge distances, building a bridge across the Rhine in 10-12 days, raiding the German tribes, and then burning said bridge, being a famous Chinese general that finally gets cornered in a town by your enemy and their massive army, and then sit on top of an open gate playing the lute, making your enemy fear a trap and turning his army around are but a few that spring to mind. But I think I like the Viking one best. Story 24. Roy Benavidez tops the list. For the uninitiated, he was a U.S. soldier who participated in the Vietnam War, and the reason he's so badass is because of what he did during the 6 hours in hell. When a 12-man patrol was surrounded and called for help, Benavidez jumped out of the helicopter with just a knife, with the intention of saving the entire patrol in the midst of enemy fire. When running to the patrol, he was shot in the leg and his face was hit with grenade shrapnel. He still managed to reach the patrol, arm himself with an AK-47 from one of the dead soldiers, and lead the walking members of the patrol to the evacuation helicopter. Benavidez then directed another helicopter to the remaining patrol members, all while providing protective fire. While doing this, he was shot in the stomach and shrapnel from another grenade hit his back, and the pilot was shot, overturning the helicopter and leaving Benavidez without an escape route. Despite this, he was able to administer first aid, organize the survivors into a defensive perimeter, and called in bombing runs and helicopter attacks, all to allow another helicopter to attempt another rescue. At one point, while administering first aid, he was shot in the leg by small arms fire. While leading the survivors to the helicopter, Benavidez was clubbed in the jaw and stabbed by a bayonet. He killed the offending soldier with a knife, and 2 other soldiers about to bring down the rescue helicopter. By the end, he sustained 37 wounds, was nearly blind and presumed dead, about to be zipped in a body bag. He spat in the face of the doctor to signal he was still alive. He ended up getting the Medal of Honor. Pretty ducking badass. Story 25. During the Second English-Dutch War in 1667, the Dutch Republic wanted to take revenge on England for destroying 150 silk merchant ships. Due to money shortage, the better part of the English fleet was called back to the motherland. Their crew fired and the ships docked at Chatham, England's most important naval base. Johan de Witt believed a single big victory would greatly enhance the Dutch bargaining power and bring about a fast end to the war. De Witt planned to destroy the docked ships in Chatham, a risky effort that would achieve his goal. His officers had doubts it would work, considering the ever-shifting sandbanks in the river mouth of the Thames. To make sure the mission would succeed, he sent Admiral Michiel de Ruyter to lead the mission, and his brother Cornelis de Witt to watch over him. At night, they sailed up the River Thames and later the Medway until they reached Chatham. They destroyed 10 small vessels, 3 large ones, and entered the HMS Unity, a previously captured Dutch ship, and HMS Royal Charles, an 80-cannon, 3-decker first-rate ship, both flagships of the English fleet, and towed them all the way back to the Netherlands. This was the single biggest loss for the English Navy and led to a fast end of the war as Johann de Witt had planned. Of the HMS Royal Charles, the stern piece can be seen to this day in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Sadly for the De Witt brothers, 5 years later during the disaster year of 1672, they would be lynched and eaten by an angry mob. Dutch history is wild. Story 26. Leo Major Dude has a list of badassery in WW2. Major single-handedly captured 93 German soldiers during the Battle of the Scheldt in Zeeland in the southern Netherlands, captured a German command half-track single-handedly, and forced them to drive it back to Allied lines. As they are driving back British at cruise not knowing it was, captures started to shoot at it. So Herr got on top of it to wave his arms and signal it was friendly. Then when he gets to the line with it, a British major tells him to hand over the half-track and its prisoners, and he is like, "Nope, duck off, I'm taking them to be turned over to Canadian troops." But that wasn't the most badass. Him and his buddy were scouting a town, and his buddy got killed, so Leo basically is like, well, duck this crap, and single-handedly drives the Nazi out of the town. While estimates vary, some put the Nazi force he drove off as high as 1,500 men. Did I mention he did most of this after the troop carrier he was in exploded and he lost an eye? Also, after WW2 was over, he went to Korea and got another Distinguished Cross Medal for taking and holding a crucial hill against crazy odds, calling in mortar artillery basically on top of his position to cover it from assault. Story 31. Senator Daniel Inouye. On April 21, 1945, enemy machine guns opened fire and struck Inouye in the chest as he and his men approached the village of San Terenzo. Showing no visible signs of his wound, he led his men forward. Approaching an enemy bunker, Inouye used his submachine gun and grenades to kill 2 German machine gun crews. As he raised another grenade to throw at a 3rd German position, an enemy grenade hit Inouye, resulting in the loss of his arm. To Inouye's dismay, he noticed the prime grenade still clutched in his disembodied fist. Despite his wounds, he ordered his men to stay back and transferred the prime grenade to his remaining hand. He threw the grenade at the enemy and continued to fight with his submachine gun. Roy Benavides has a hell of a mo citation as well. Story 32. John Stapp strapped himself to a rocket in the desert and shot it off to measure how much deceleration G's the human body could take, at one point going blind, temporarily, breaking his wrists, breaking ribs, and losing the fillings in his teeth. The test results were basically, did you die? And if not, he'd up the ante. He did this 29 times total. Pictures of the tests look like Wile E. Coyote rockets with a lawn chair on top. He held a land speed record with his rig and another record for the most G-forces survived by a human, voluntarily, 46.2 G. His research is what made ejection seats work for pilots, but also was used for airbags and car crash safety stuff. The guy saved untold lives and continues to do so posthumously. Plus, he was a doctor and seemed like a really nice guy. I can only imagine the amount of rocket force necessary to propel balls that big. Story 33. Operation Postmaster featured in the highly dramatized movie The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Lead by Major Gus March Phillips. They managed to steal an important Nazi supply ship docked in a neutral port with 0 casualties. It was regarded as one of the earliest examples of Black Ops. Major Gus March Phillips was also one of the main inspiration for Ian Fleming's James Bond character, and the SOE with their quirky gadgets, shoes that leave false footprints, guns with silencers, and guns that are hidden in sleeves, was definitely the inspiration for how MI6 works in the movies. Story 34. Mad Jack Churchill, Scottish soldier during WW2. He really didn't like guns. He wasn't opposed to violence. He just felt guns took the sport of it away. So Jack was subsequently photographed charging the beaches of Normandy with a broadsword and a longbow. The ducker was so crazy he actually managed to capture 40 German by himself at some point. Again, sans guns. Story 35. Samuel Whittemore was 78 when the British attacked Concord and Lexington and were driven back to Boston on April 19, 1775. This is considered the start of the American Revolution. He was farming when he heard what had happened and that the British were coming through Menotomy, now Arlington. So he went and got his musket and pistols and hid behind a wall. When a scouting party for the British appeared, he jumped up and killed 2, possibly a third. He was shot in the face, tearing part of it off. He was bayoneted several times and beaten with the muskets of the British. They left him for dead to retreat back to Boston. And he did die. Almost 18 years later, on Feb 2nd of 1793, Story 36. Emmett Till. A black kid who 2 men took away in the night because he had supposedly flirted with a white woman. They beat him until he was unrecognizable and threatened to kill him, but he continued to brag about his white girlfriend and refused to be scared of these people. His mother had told home to bow down before a white person if he had to, but he didn't. Sadly, the 2 men shot him in the head, and when charged with murder were proven innocent, so not a happy ending. Mother kept with the badassery, though, and had the funeral be open cassette so people could see what happened to her boy. Pictures of body-linked bellow. It's awful. So viewer discretion advised. Story 37. Aimo Koivunen, a Finnish soldier out on ski patrol when his group was surrounded by the Soviets. He and some other members of his patrol escaped, and while on the run, he consumed the patrol's entire supply of Pervitin, meth, in desperation when he became fatigued. He spent about a week in a drug-induced haze, during which he skied over 400 kilometers, 248.5 miles, ate only pine buds and a single bird he caught and ate raw, and was injured by a landmine. When found by friendly forces, he was taken to the hospital, where they measured his heart rate at 200 BPM and his weight was down to 43 kilo, 94.8 lbs. Story 38. Desmond Doss was a medic who, due to his religious beliefs, refused to wield a weapon and take someone's life. He served his country by saving and giving aid to his fellow men. His most notable deed was done on the Battle of Okinawa, where he spent several hours saving the lives of around 75 wounded soldiers by lowering them down a cliff known as the Hacksaw Ridge while under heavy fire. Story 39. Tobia the German Zambon. Drafted at 49 years old for WWI, he ended up in an uphill trench to fight against the Austrians. The Austrians had the best position, and advancing against their barbed wire was certain death. Tasked with taking down the barbed wire according to traditional Italian doctrine, he lost 2 squads of kids young enough to be his children. Understandably upset, he disappeared with 3 explosive charges. He got corrupting a carabiniere with the promise of some wine. People wrote him off as a bad case of shell shock until 2 days later, when 3 perfectly timed explosions above the Austrian position caused a surgical precision landslide, which leveled the trench. 0 Italian casualties. When he went back to his position, he was punished for stealing supplies. The carabinieri got punished for getting corrupted. Story 40. Audie Murphy. The man couldn't walk with the amount of medals on his chest. Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star. 2. Legion of Merit, Bronze Star Medal. 2. 1. V. Device. Purple Heart. 3. Legion of Honor. France. Croix de Guerre with Silver Star. France. Croix de Guerre with Palm. 3. France. Croix de Guerre with Palm. Belgium. Outstanding Civilian Service Medal. Texas Legislative Medal of Honor. Story 41. Not someone in important history, just family history. My grandfather was getting coffee at a gas station when 2 dudes were making racial slurs towards him. When he exited, they were still saying racist crap to him. My uncle, who was there, said he threw his coffees to the ground and threw hands. Turns out the two racists he beat up were cops. He got kicked out of town, but still came back because he owned a house in that town, lol. That dude was the most badass person I've ever known. Thank you all for watching. Watch even more great stories on my channel.